Federal Judge Richard Burman has issued an ultimatum that changes everything. 3 words appeared in the court order filed at 11:47 a.m. Eastern Time: immediate arrest authorized. FBI Director Kash Patel now faces a December 20th deadline. Comply with court-mandated document releases tied to the Jeffrey Epstein investigation, or federal marshals will take him into custody. No additional hearings, no appeals process, just detention until compliance. This is not a negotiation. This is the enforcement of constitutional authority against the nation's top law enforcement official. And the documents at the center of this crisis detail connections between Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein's criminal network that 3 federal courts have already ruled must be disclosed. The question is no longer whether these files will be released. The question is whether the FBI director will be jailed first. To understand how we arrived at this moment, you need to understand the legal machinery that brought a sitting FBI director to the edge of federal detention. This case originates from congressional subpoenas issued in early 2025, demanding FBI records related to the Bureau's investigations into Jeffrey Epstein's sex trafficking operation. Those subpoenas specifically requested documents detailing any investigative leads, witness statements, or evidence connecting Donald Trump to Epstein's activities. Director Patel, appointed by Trump during his second term, immediately invoked executive privilege, claiming the materials were classified and protected under ongoing investigation exemptions. Congress rejected those claims and filed suit in federal district court, seeking enforcement. Judge Burman, a Reagan appointee with a reputation for strict adherence to procedure and zero tolerance for obstruction, took the case. Over the following 6 months, Patel's legal team deployed every available delay tactic. They filed privilege logs claiming attorney-client protections. They argued national security concerns. They insisted the investigations remained open, despite Jeffrey Epstein being deceased and Ghislaine Maxwell serving a federal sentence. Judge Burman systematically dismantled each argument.
In June 2025, the court ordered Patel to produce a detailed index of all withheld documents. Patel missed the deadline. In July, the court issued a second order with a 30-day compliance window. Patel filed for an extension. In August, Judge Burman granted 60 additional days and warned that further delays would trigger contempt proceedings. Patel's attorneys responded with another round of privilege claims, this time asserting that disclosure would interfere with FBI counterintelligence operations. The court requested classified briefings from the Director of National Intelligence. The DNI's office submitted a sworn declaration stating unequivocally that none of the subpoenaed materials contained classified information. By September, Judge Burman's patience had evaporated. A third order was issued, this time with explicit language: produce the documents within 90 days or face sanctions. Patel's team appealed to the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. The appellate panel upheld Judge Burman's ruling in a unanimous decision, noting that the FBI director's privilege assertions were without legal merit and represented a pattern of obstruction inconsistent with the duties of his office. Patel then filed an emergency petition to the Supreme Court, seeking a stay. The court declined to hear the case, allowing the lower court's order to stand.
That brings us to December 17, 2025. With all appeals exhausted and the 90-day deadline expired, Judge Burman scheduled a contempt hearing. The atmosphere inside the federal courthouse in Washington was tense. Reporters packed the gallery. Congressional staffers monitored from overflow rooms. Legal scholars recognized they were witnessing a rare constitutional collision between judicial authority and executive branch defiance. FBI Director Kash Patel sat at the defense table, flanked by 3 attorneys from a prominent Washington firm. He projected the same bureaucratic confidence that had carried him through months of congressional testimony. But federal judges operate under different rules than congressional committees. They possess enforcement powers that extend far beyond political theater. Judge Burman opened the hearing with a question that cut directly to the heart of the matter. Director Patel, this court has issued 4 separate orders directing you to produce documents subpoenaed by Congress and requested under the Freedom of Information Act. You have defied every one of them. I will ask you plainly, do you intend to comply with this court's orders?
Patel's lead attorney stood to respond, but Judge Burman cut him off. "Counselor, sit down. I didn't ask you. I asked Director Patel. And I'm referring specifically to documents that 3 federal courts have already ruled are not privileged, not classified, and not exempt from disclosure. Director Patel, yes or no, will you comply? What happened next set the trajectory for everything that followed." Patel looked toward his legal team, then addressed the court. "Your Honor, the FBI continues to have serious concerns that releasing these materials could endanger national security and compromise investigative methods. We believe the documents should remain," Judge Burman interrupted. "That is not an answer. Yes or no, will you comply with this court's order to produce the subpoenaed documents?" Patel posed. Then came the response that triggered the contempt machinery. "Your Honor, we believe further review is necessary before—"
"Stop." Judge Burman's voice turned cold. "Director Patel, let me be absolutely clear. This court has examined your privilege claims in full. 3 federal courts have rejected them. The documents are not classified. The intelligence community has confirmed they are not covered by attorney-client privilege. Executive privilege does not apply. The Supreme Court resolved that issue decades ago in United States v. Nixon. So when I ask whether you will comply with this court's order, what I am really asking is whether you are deliberately choosing to defy the constitutional authority of the federal judiciary. That choice constitutes contempt of court, and contempt has immediate consequences." The courtroom fell silent. Every journalist present understood they were watching a historic moment unfold. Patel's attorney attempted to intervene again, requesting additional time. Judge Burman's response was swift and unequivocal. "Additional time? You have already had 6 months. This court granted 30 days after the first order, 60 days after the second, and 90 days after the third. You used every extension to file more motions, assert more privilege claims, and manufacture further delay. That phase is over."
Then came the ultimatum that would dominate headlines for days. Judge Burman leaned forward and delivered his final warning with unmistakable force. "Director Patel, this is your final notice. You will produce every court-ordered document, fully and without redaction, by December 20th at 5 p.m. That is 3 days from now. If you do not comply, this court will issue a warrant for your immediate arrest on criminal contempt charges." The word arrest sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Federal judges threatening immediate arrest for contempt was rare. Threatening the FBI director with arrest was unprecedented in modern American history. Patel's attorney objected. "Your Honor, surely the court wouldn't." "Oh, I absolutely would," Judge Burman replied, his words cutting through the courtroom with unmistakable force. "And let me be perfectly clear about what will happen if Director Patel continues this obstruction. On December 20th at 5:01 p.m., if those documents have not been delivered to this court in full compliance with my orders, I will sign an arrest warrant. Federal marshals will immediately take Director Patel into custody. He will remain in federal detention until he purges his contempt by complying with this court's directives." The judge paused, allowing the gravity of the moment to settle. "There is no middle ground here, Director Patel. You either comply with constitutional authority or you go to jail. Those are the only 2 options before you." The color visibly drained from Patel's face. The self-assured bureaucrat who had spent months deflecting scrutiny was now confronting a federal judge with real enforcement power. His attorney attempted another objection, noting that the FBI director carries critical responsibilities that would make detention extremely disruptive. Judge Burman's response was flat and final. "Then I strongly suggest he comply. The FBI director is not above the law. He is not exempt from constitutional obligations, and he does not get to pick and choose which court orders to obey based on political convenience." The judge then laid out the legal framework that made his warning not just serious, but unavoidable. This court is fully prepared to proceed under Title 18, United States Code, Section 401. Criminal contempt authorizes immediate arrest and detention. Director Patel would be taken into custody by federal marshals and held until he complies. This is not a negotiation. It is not a threat. It is the operation of the rule of law. Judge Burman then added a consequence that raised the stakes even higher. Additionally, this court is prepared to refer this matter to the appropriate state bar associations for possible disbarment proceedings. Director Patel holds active law licenses in multiple jurisdictions. Willful defiance of court orders is a recognized basis for professional discipline, up to and including disbarment. If he chooses to continue defying this court, he will not merely risk temporary loss of liberty, he could permanently lose his ability to practice law. At that moment, the stakes became existential. Compliance meant potentially exposing damaging information about Trump's connections to Epstein. Defiance meant arrest, detention, and professional destruction.
Patel made one final attempt to justify his obstruction. Your Honor, the documents at issue involve sensitive details connected to ongoing investigations. Judge Burman cut him off sharply. What ongoing investigations? Jeffrey Epstein is deceased. Ghislaine Maxwell is serving a federal sentence. The criminal investigation concluded years ago. You continue invoking ongoing investigation privilege for matters that are long closed. That is not a legal justification. That is obstruction. The judge reached for another file. And let us dispense with your national security claim as well. The Director of National Intelligence has submitted a sworn declaration to this court, stating unequivocally that none of the subpoenaed materials contain classified information. That argument is therefore false. From the gallery, a reporter called out, asking about documents specifically related to Trump. The bailiff moved to object, but Judge Burman responded anyway. This court is fully aware that many of the withheld materials concern FBI investigations into connections between former President Trump and Jeffrey Epstein's criminal network. The court is also aware of Director Patel's documented pattern of shielding Mr. Trump from legal exposure. However, those political considerations are entirely irrelevant here. This court's authority does not change based on who may be implicated. The law applies equally to everyone. Then, Judge Burman made a connection that exposed the political nature of Patel's obstruction. This court further notes that while Director Patel insists he cannot release files related to the Epstein investigation, he has nevertheless found ample time to authorize the release of records aimed at President Trump's political opponents. That selective use of so-called privilege strongly suggests these are not good faith legal positions, but politically driven obstruction. Exactly 15 minutes into the hearing, Judge Burman issued his final directive. Director Patel, you have 3 days. By December 20th at 5 p.m., every document this court has ordered must be delivered in full compliance. If you miss that deadline, federal marshals will take you into custody immediately. You will be held in federal detention until you comply. There will be no additional hearing. There will be no appeal before arrest. You will simply go to jail.
He paused, letting the words land with full weight. And I want to make something else unmistakably clear. This deadline coincides with the court-ordered release of additional Epstein files on December 19th. If you believe partial disclosure will satisfy this court,
You are mistaken. I am ordering full compliance, not selected records, not redacted versions, everything this court has ordered." Patel's attorney made one final attempt. "Your Honor, surely the court recognizes that the FBI director possesses constitutional authority over executive branch investigations." Judge Burman's response was immediate and severe. "The FBI director has no authority to ignore court orders. None. Zero. The Constitution is explicit about separation of powers and the supremacy of judicial authority. In this context, Director Patel may invoke executive authority all he wishes, but when a federal court issues a lawful order grounded in constitutional power, he must comply." End of discussion. With that, the judge gathered his papers. "This hearing is adjourned. Director Patel, you have your deadline. Use the next 3 days wisely, because on December 20th at 5:01 p.m., you will either be in compliance or you will be in custody. Those are the only outcomes." The moment the gavel fell, the courtroom exploded into motion. Reporters scrambled to file breaking alerts. Legal analysts went live, debating whether a federal judge could truly jail a sitting FBI director. Constitutional scholars quickly provided the answer. Yes, contempt power applies to anyone who defies a lawful court order, regardless of rank or position. Within hours, the political fallout began to spread across Washington. Democrats on Capitol Hill applauded Judge Burman for enforcing accountability at the highest levels of government. Republicans fractured. Some publicly defended Patel under the guise of protecting sensitive information. Others privately conceded that open defiance of court orders was impossible to justify, regardless of political allegiance. Most consequentially, the December 20th deadline set a ticking constitutional clock. In just 3 days, one of two things would happen. Either Patel would release documents that could expose Trump's connections to Jeffrey Epstein's criminal enterprise, or the FBI director himself would be arrested and jailed, triggering an unprecedented leadership crisis at the nation's top law enforcement agency. By that evening, further details surfaced about what had been withheld. According to sources familiar with the subpoenas, the documents included FBI files outlining Trump's long-standing social ties to Epstein, witness statements placing Trump at Epstein-owned properties during periods when trafficking activity occurred, and internal FBI communications referencing political pressure to minimize or shut down investigations connected to Trump. Congressional sources revealed that Patel had specifically blocked release of documents showing that FBI agents had recommended a criminal investigation into Trump's connections to Epstein's trafficking operation, but that recommendation had been overruled after political intervention from Trump appointees within the Justice Department. The scheduled December 19th release of Epstein-related files, just 1 day before Patel's court-imposed deadline, was expected to include victim testimony and flight records that would make any continued withholding of documents virtually indefensible. Once the public saw what had already been disclosed, the pressure to release everything still concealed would intensify dramatically. Legal analysts emphasized how rare Judge Burman's warning truly was. Federal judges almost never threaten immediate arrest for contempt, but when they do, history shows they nearly always carry it out. The contempt power is among the judiciary's most essential tools. Without it, courts would lack any real ability to enforce their orders against officials who simply refuse to comply. What set this case apart was who stood in the crosshairs. The FBI director is meant to be the nation's top federal law enforcement official, sworn to uphold the Constitution and enforce federal law. The prospect of that individual being jailed for defying judicial authority represented a staggering institutional crisis. Yet the alternative, allowing the FBI director to ignore court orders without consequence, would be even more dangerous, effectively elevating executive officials above the rule of law.
By December 18th, with only 2 days remaining, there were no signs that Patel planned to comply. Sources close to him suggested he believed Trump would ultimately shield him through some combination of executive privilege claims, a potential pardon, or political pressure on the courts. But Judge Burman had already dismantled those assumptions. Executive privilege had been decisively rejected by 3 federal courts. Pardons do not apply to civil contempt proceedings, and the judiciary, by constitutional design, is insulated from political coercion. The countdown was underway. 48 hours remained before Patel would either release documents potentially exposing Trump's Epstein connections or become the first FBI director in U.S. history jailed for contempt of court. The timing of the December 20th deadline only amplified its significance. Its proximity to the December 19th Epstein file release meant that if those disclosures proved explosive, featuring victim testimony implicating Trump or FBI evidence of criminal conduct, any continued obstruction would become politically impossible to defend, even among Trump's staunchest allies. The implications reached far beyond Patel himself. Jailing an FBI director would establish a stark precedent. No executive official, regardless of rank, is immune from lawful court orders. Such a moment would fundamentally reinforce the constitutional balance of power between the judiciary and the executive branch. Judge Burman's readiness to take that step sent an unmistakable warning, not just to Patel, but to every Trump-aligned official watching closely. As the December 20th deadline approached, the nation watched to see whether the rule of law would prevail, or whether the FBI director would choose loyalty to Trump over compliance with constitutional authority. Either outcome would reshape American politics. One would demonstrate that no official is above the law. The other would signal that executive branch officials can defy federal courts without consequence, a development that would fundamentally undermine the separation of powers. The clock was ticking, and the FBI director faced a choice